Greetings, this is Canadian History X. Over the course of the 20th century, Canada has been known as a place that rises to a challenge when it comes to war. From the Boer War of the very late 19th century to the most recent war in Afghanistan, Canada has always tended to step up. When we look back at the First World War, Canada had several big moments, and not the least of which was the Battle of Vimy Ridge, when Canada, in some regards, truly became a country. There have been many heroes during those wars, and we're going to be talking about a lot of them over the course of this year. But right now we're going to talk about the heroes of the sky. We're going to talk about the Canadian flying aces of the First World War. Now, I should point out that when I look at the flying aces, which is a definition of anybody who had more than 5 kills in the air during the course of the war, I'm not going to be looking at them in order. I'm not doing the top 10 who had the most kills or anything like that. I chose the ones who had kind of the most interesting story to tell. And so we're going to begin with probably the greatest flying ace of them all, William Bishop, also known as Billy Bishop. Now, he had 72 confirmed kills in the air, and that high number actually put him third amongst all pilots during the war, and only 8 back from the legendary Red Baron. He was originally born in Owen Sound, and he was never one for team sports. He always liked to do things himself, and that kind of made the life of a pilot something that suited him, but he probably didn't know it at the time. Now, at the age of 15, he began to develop a very keen interest in aviation, and he actually built an aircraft of cardboard and string, and he decided to take it for a flight, and he took it right off the top of his family's 3rd-story house, and survived the injuries. 2 years later, he entered the Royal Military College of Canada, and promptly failed out because he was cheating. But when the First World War broke out, he jumped at the chance and he enlisted as a cavalry officer, but became sick and missed shipping out. So, he joined the Mounted Infantry Unit, where he became known for his ability with a gun, and he also had what seemed to be superhuman eyesight. He would ship over to France and begin fighting in 1915, but he hated the trenches, and he saw those planes flying above and he wanted to fly, so he transferred to the Royal Flying Corps. And he originally was not a pilot but an observer, so that meant he sat in the second seat, taking pictures, maybe operating a machine gun, but generally no flying. By 1916, he was training in England to be a pilot, and he would get his wings in November of that year. Now, Billy Bishop was known for his no-holds-barred way of flying. He would dive into the fighting, take enemy fighters on, he would do whatever he could. He would fly recklessly and dangerously, but he would take out the enemy. He even took on the Red Baron, lived to tell the tale. On June 2nd, 1917, he took off on a solo mission to take out an aerodrome, and he did. He shot down 3 aircraft in the process and destroyed many more on the ground. Because of that, he was awarded the highest military honor that you can receive in Canada, the Victoria Cross. In 1917, he returned to Canada and he was a hero. He married his longtime fiancée Margaret and then headed back to England in April of 1918. He was promoted to major and he was given the command of the Flying Foxes. Now, because of his well-known reputation, he was actually able to choose his own pilots, and he did. And from May 30th to June 1st alone, with the Flying Foxes, he took out 6 enemy planes. Now, the Canadian government began to worry, because Billy Bishop was famous, and they worried that if he were to die, the morale for the war would plummet in Canada. So he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and sent back home, just as the war ended. After the war, Bishop would move to Britain, where he eventually became the chairman of British Airlines. When the stock market crashed and his family lost pretty much everything, he returned to Canada. In 1936, he was made the first Air Vice Marshal in Canadian history, and he was promoted to Air Marshal when the Second World War broke out. Under his leadership, the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan successfully trained 167,000 men in Canada, the United States, and Britain to fly. He would die in 1956 at the age of 62. Today, several streets, buildings, and parks are named after Bishop. There's even Mount Bishop in the Canadian Rockies, named for him. William Barker. You may not know him, you may not recognize his name, but he's the most decorated serviceman in Canadian history, and he was born on November 3rd, 1894, in Dauphin, Manitoba. He grew up riding horses and working at a sawmill, and he quickly developed an ability to make a shot at nearly any distance, and he could do so, even when he was riding a horse. When he was a young man, he began to see pioneer aviators fly at the farm exhibitions, and that inspired him to become a pilot. So, at the outbreak of the First World War, he jumped at the chance and enlisted with the 1st Canadian Mounted Rifles. He was sent to England in June of 1915, and then to France in September. And it was there he served as a gunner until he was finally transferred to the Royal Flying Corps in March of 1916. And like Billy Bishop, he served as an observer before he became a pilot. But he quickly established himself as being able to shoot down many planes as a gunner in the air. On November 15th, he and his pilot helped to break up a German offensive, and for his efforts he was awarded the Military Cross. In January of 1916, he began training as a pilot and quickly earned his wings. As a pilot, it would not be long before he had a second bar on his Military Cross after he was wounded in the air in August of 1917. He would serve briefly as an instructor before coming back and fighting on the Italian front from 1917 to 1918. While serving in France, he began to learn about the new combat techniques that were being used by many pilots in the air. One day, he attacked a Rumpier two-seater and took on 15 more enemy machines, where he was shot 3 times in the leg and had his left elbow shot off. But even with his injuries, he managed to shoot down 3 more enemy planes, and he would crash on the Allied front lines and would hang on to life until January of 1919, when he was finally cleared from the hospital. For his efforts, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, and he would finish the war with 50 kills. During the First World War, he would earn the Victoria Cross, the Distinguished Service Order and Bar, the Military Cross and 2 bars, the Silver Medals for Military Valor, and much more. Following the war, he became the director of the RCAF, but continued to suffer from the injuries that he had during that iconic air battle. He had limited arm movement, and his legs were permanently damaged. In 1930, after losing control of his plane during a demonstration flight near Ottawa, he was killed, and his funeral will be the largest state event in the history of Toronto to that time, with an honor guard of 2,000 soldiers and a cortege that stretched for 1.5 miles. Thomas Williams. Born in 1885, Thomas Williams may have only had 14 kills in the air, but he had a major impact on Canadian aviation. Enlisting at the outbreak of the First World War, he was shipped to England, where he switched to the Flying Corps in 1916. In 1917, he was in the air and would have the distinction of being shot down by the Red Barons Flying Circus on September 22nd. He survived. On October 24th, he finally did it. He shot down his first plane. A few weeks later, he was shot down by accident by a Canadian machine gunner on the ground who mistook him for an enemy aircraft. On January 10th, 1918, he officially became a flying ace after getting his 5th kill. Over the course of the war, in 199 flights, he would destroy 8 planes, drive 4 out of control, and capture 1 plane after killing its pilot. Returning to Canada in the 1920s, he began barnstorming, which was essentially taking planes and doing acrobatic trips for settlers all across Canada, and he helped found the Royal Canadian Air Force. When the Second World War broke out, he joined the Fleet Aircraft Company and served as a test pilot for them until 1948. He would eventually find himself in the Canadian Aviation Hall of Fame, and he was very active in the reunions of First World War veterans. He would fly aerobatics well into old age, all the way to the age of 86 in 1971. When he was 97, he wrote a volume of poetry, and he would pass away in 1985 at the age of 99, just a couple months short of turning 100. Ernest Hoy. Another flying ace from Dauphin was Ernest Charles Hoy, who was a pioneer pilot in Canadian history and one of our greatest pilots. Born in 1895, he first enlisted in the regular forces on March 3, 1915, and would eventually join the 29th Squadron as a Royal Aircraft Factory pilot in January of 1918. It would not be until August 12th of 1918 that he would record his first kill. Through the month of August, he would notch 7 kills and 6 more in September, finishing the war with 13. And he would earn his final victory on September 28, 1918, when he shot down a German pilot who would become a prisoner of war. 1 year after the war, he would make the first air mail delivery over the Canadian Rockies when he flew from Vancouver to Calgary over the course of 16 hours to deliver the airmail shipment. He would pass away in the United States in 1982. Wilfrid May. A legendary pilot, Wap May was born Wilfrid May in 1896 in Carberry, Manitoba. A lot of flying aces from Manitoba. And he would go on to gain a great deal of fame during the First World War and beyond. Enlisting in the war in February of 1916, he quickly rose through the ranks and was a gunnery instructor by the end of the year. In 1917, after being shipped to England, he applied to join the Royal Flying Corps. Now, things did not get off to a great start. His first flight resulted in the destruction of not only his own aircraft, but that of another one. Nonetheless, he was accepted as a pilot and began training in London, and he would earn his wings in February of 1918. He would fight his first aerial battle on April 20th of that year. On April 21st, he was sent out on a patrol with a squadron and was soon attacked by German fighters. And during the fight, he saw a plane circling above, and he decided to pursue it and launch an attack. The plane fled in the middle of the fight, and after his machine guns jammed, he dove out of combat. Little did he know, that plane was flown by a man named Wolfram, the cousin of the Red Baron. Upon seeing his cousin being attacked, the Red Baron flew into the fight to rescue him and begin chasing May. Roy Brown, another Canadian pilot, saw the Red Baron attacking May and dove into the fight. By the end of it, the Red Baron was shot down, and no one knows if it was Brown or May who shot the legendary pilot down. Following the war, May returned to Canada and he opened up the first airfield near Edmonton. He also created one of the first barnstorming companies in the world. In 1919, he was hired by the Edmonton police chief to find a man who was wanted in the murder of a police officer. May flew the chief to Edson nearby, and they caught the man soon after. In September of 1928, an employee of Hudson's Bay Company in Little Red River, Alberta, became ill. It was found he had diphtheria, and he needed medicine immediately. Now, there were no roads to the location at the time, and May was asked to deliver the medicine by air on January 1st, and he left in his Avro Avian and landed the next day at the little community where the medicine could be distributed. He would not arrive back in Edmonton until January 7th, and by that time, when he arrived home, he was a hero for his race against death, and he was greeted by the mayor upon landing. Now, he wasn't done making a name for himself. In 1932, he was involved in the manhunt for the Mad Trapper. May was hired to see if he could find where the trapper had gone after killing an RCMP officer. He would find footprints leading off over a frozen river. The Mad Trapper, Albert Johnson, was soon engaged by the RCMP and killed in a legendary firefight. May quickly landed his plane right after the firefight, loaded an injured RCMP officer into his plane, and then flew 201 kilometers to get him help, thereby saving his life. During the Second World War, May would train pilots for the British government and serve as commander of a flight school near Edmonton. During this time, he also assisted the United States with a pararescue training, and he was awarded the Medal of Freedom in 1947 for his efforts. He would pass away while hiking in 1952. Mayfield, a neighborhood in Edmonton, is named in his honor. In addition, a rock on the south slope of Endurance Crater on Mars was named Wap May in honor of him, and the Wap May Fault Zone, which is west of Hudson's Bay along the Wap May River, is named for him. William Stephenson. While he achieved fame as a flying ace, William Stephenson would go on to become one of the most famous individuals in Canadian history after the war. Ironically, many of us do not know who he is, at least now, but he had a major impact on a variety of things. It all began on January 23, 1897, when he was born in Winnipeg. In January of 1916, he would volunteer for the war effort, and he was sent over on the SS Olympic, and eventually become part of the Canadian Engineering Training Depot. On August 15, 1917, he was granted a commission with the Royal Flying Corps and was posted to the 73rd Squadron on February 9, 1918. During his time as a pilot that year, he would shoot down 12 enemy planes and become an ace. He would be shot down behind enemy lines on July 28, 1918, and serve as a prisoner of war until he escaped in October. As an ace, he would be awarded the Military Cross and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Following the war, he developed a business plan with George W. Walton for transmitting photographic images via wireless, and this would produce him $12 million per year in our funds in patents for the next 18 years, making him a very wealthy man. With his broad base of contacts in Europe through his business dealings, he began to provide Winston Churchill with information about the Nazi government, and he was able to show that the Nazis were preparing for war, and Churchill used that very information to argue against appeasement of Adolf Hitler. Upon the outbreak of the Second World War, Stephenson began work for the British Security Coordination, setting up a branch covertly in the United States in 1940. And he would become a close advisor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president at the time, and would aid in the creation of the CIA. Over the course of the Second World War, he would provide an immense amount of intelligence through his operations throughout the Western Hemisphere, and he also created Camp X in Whitby, Ontario, and that was the first training school in North America for spy activities, and over 2,000 operatives from the British, Canadian, and American sides were trained there between 1941 and 1945. One graduate of this program was rumored to be Ian Fleming, who would go on to create James Bond. For this reason, many believe that Stephenson was a model for 007. In 1945, Stephenson was knighted for his services to England, becoming Sir William Stephenson, and he was also presented with the Medal for Merit by President Truman. In 1979, he was made Companion of the Order of Canada. He would pass away in 1989 at the age of 92. In 2008, he was made an honorary member of the U.S. Army Intelligence Corps. Only 2 other non-Americans have had this honor. There's a library named for him in Winnipeg, as well as a statue of him in the city. In addition, several streets throughout Canada are named in his honor. Thank you for listening to Canadian History X. If you enjoyed the episode, please click like or subscribe on iTunes, as well on our YouTube page. You can find links to everything, including our Discord chat, where we chat about history, on my blog at canadaehx.blogspot.ca. Thanks.